Dads, help your children tremble with joy in the presence of God. Dads, help your children tremble with joy in the presence of God. I have one means to suggest for how to do it. Fathers, be the kind of father that your children delight to fear. Fathers, be the kind of fathers whom your children delight to fear. That is, take your proper place as God's representative in this family and display the way He really is. That's the burden I have felt for 34 years. I am God to my children until they know better. If they only fear you and there's no delight in it, it's wrong and dysfunctional. If they only delight in you and there's no fear in it, it's wrong and it's dysfunctional. In both cases, you have made it very difficult for them to embrace the true God. I have had in my mind since Karsten was born, I must so father these boys, and now Talitha, that when they come to know God, they will want to believe in Him because they have believed in me. That's a high calling. That's a high calling. Which means there must be wrath and there must be compassion. And the children must learn it. On the one hand, you have Proverbs 13:24. Whoever spares the rod hates his son, but who loves him is diligent to discipline him. Why? Because that's the way God is. Hebrews 12:6. The Lord disciplines the one whom He loves, chastises every son whom He receives. That's why little babies have fat bottoms. You also read in the Bible, Ephesians 6:4, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. You hear that phrase, bring them up in the discipline of the Lord, the discipline of the Lord. This is not yours, this is God's. You are playing God here. You are representing me there, God says. So bring them up in my discipline in such a way that they don't get angry, but delight in your discipline. You think that's impossible? It is without God, because you're trying to display God. The world doesn't have a clue what this is about, what fathers are for. Fathers are for the representation of God so that children will come to believe in hell and heaven and Christ, the whole thing in Dad. And Mom, if this were a sermon on parenting, I would talk about why there are two parents in the ideal family, and one of them is a woman. That's big, but this is not a sermon on that, so I won't. But you can use your imagination pretty easily to imagine why that might be. Oh, so godlike we must be in our compassion. Listen to Psalm 103. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear Him. Fear Him. For He knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust. So I think we want our children to delight to fear us. In a store where, of course, if you spank them, you'll get arrested, your eyes should be able to do it with lightning ready to strike, with your eyes. And they won't go that way. They'll be quiet because you just said, be quiet. Daddy said so. And there's been enough discipline at home that they'll behave in the store. I want my daughter, Talitha, and my 4 sons. I mean, this is kind of vulnerable for a guy to preach like this, right? I got 4 sons, and 2 of them are at this church. And so you can go to them and say, what was that like? I want those boys to say, I mean, they're too old to say it now, but Talitha should soon say this. I want them to say, Daddy, disobeying you is a fearful thing. And I am thankful that it is. But oh, what a sanctuary you are to me. How I love to live in the light of your strength and joy. And I could tell so many stories about disciplining my boys, followed by the kind of hugging that would not be possible if I played games with their disobedience. And I think would not be possible if I did this modern thing about take a time out in the corner and stare at the wall. But this is not a sermon on discipline. Dads, pray that God would give you the grace to so love your kids and so discipline your kids that they delight to fear you and then have little problem believing in the God of the Bible when they learn what He's like. Lastly, evangelism. We live in a day where it seems like the only kind of evangelism that is openly talked about is trying to help people understand the love of God. And I really am in favor of that. And guess what? I don't think it's possible for people to understand the love of God without the wrath of God. There are so many people who either think they're converted or modestly are converted, and their understanding of the love of God is a millimeter deep because they don't have a clue that He's rescued them at the cost of His own Son from His wrath. That's the main problem in the world, is the wrath of God. It is not broken marriages. It is not kids on drugs. It is not cancer. It is not unemployment. The main problem is the wrath of God rests upon every unbeliever in this world and will bring them to utter ruin unless we can snatch them by the gospel from underneath the wrath. And guess who can do that? God. The love of God saves people from the wrath of God, and that's what makes all the difference in how you do evangelism. So we tell them the gospel, and the gospel goes like this. You can put it in 6 steps, like I do in the little tract that we use called Quest for Joy. You can put it in 4 steps. Let's just put it in 4 steps. God, sin, cross, faith. I'll fill it up with a sentence. There is a holy, infinitely valuable, beautiful, glorious, all-just God. We have sinned and fallen short of that glory and are under condemnation. There is no hope. You can't come into His presence like that. Cross. Christ bore our sins so that all who will believe in Him are saved. 4. Believe Him. Trust, that's a gospel. It's got to start with God. It's got to start with the way He really is. It's got to start with His justice and holiness. Or at least, I don't overstate it, it has to get there sometime. If it doesn't start there, you go there. Otherwise, what will they trust Him for? And how will they glorify Christ? Paul had one shot. Paul had one shot at Felix. And this is what Luke tells us he did. He reasoned about righteousness, self-control, and the coming judgment. You got one shot to talk to the mayor or the governor. What are you going to talk about? He's going to include coming judgment. So evangelism, parenting, corporate worship are all dramatically transformed if you fear and tremble at the greatness and the wrath of God. And until that's known, I think our worship will be superficial, our parenting will be very man-centered probably, and our evangelism will be crimped and inadequate. But if we see the wrath of God, everything changes, especially our view of Jesus. Surely He has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, but we esteemed Him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But He was bruised for our iniquities, and He was wounded for our transgressions. The chastisement and the discipline that makes us whole was on Him. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned, every one of us, to our own way, and God laid on Him the iniquity of us all and crushed Him, that you might live with no wrath on you. Oh, love Jesus. Receive Jesus. I welcome you to embrace Jesus